Once upon a time, a certain witch put a curse on the inhabitants of the small country of Amaryllis, because of which people fell into a deep sleep. Their castle was covered with thorny thickets, and a dragon was flying above it. No one dared to come close to it. The kingdom of Amaryllis was waiting for someone to come who could save the princesses and remove the curse from them. A dark-haired man was sitting behind a wall, hiding from the dragon. He held a sword in his hands and thought that a little more and he would crush the monster and definitely save this country. The guy jumped out of hiding and attacked the dragon with a scream, but he only looked at him questioningly. The attacker broke into a sweat and ran away. He screamed that it was not close, and the monster was still full of strength. The monster tried to strike, but the guy dodged and fell. There was silence in the air and the man walked up to the monster and poked it with his sword, wondering if it was dead and was it really dead. The guy clenched his fist and shouted that he had won. He bent over the ground and thought that he had finally decided not to risk his health, which caused it to drag on for 3 days, but he prevailed. The man opened the scroll and read that after he killed the dragon and climbed to the top of the tower, he would see the princesses sleeping in their room, and the princesses would open their eyes as soon as the hero touched them with his lips. So he would remove the curse and save the inhabitants of these lands from eternal sleep. The man went up the spiral staircase and thought that it had to be here somewhere. This part had always been more interesting to him than conquering a dragon. But he did not understand the word about a kiss and decided that there was no doubt now and he was doing it for the future of this country. When the prince looked into the room, he saw 7 sleeping princesses lying on the bed by the window. He thought that there were so many of them, and took out the scroll again. It did not say that there would be only one princess, so he decided that they were all princesses and did not understand that he to do. The hero decided that for now he needed to wake up at least one. He climbed onto the bed and looked at the girl, not understanding where he got this feeling of guilt. The man broke into a sweat and mentally apologized to the princess, explaining that it was necessary in order to save her, after which he bent down for a kiss. The girl opened her eyes and quickly got out of bed. She looked at the stranger with her eyes and mouth wide open. This was the 3rd Princess Claire. Her favorite food was vanilla ice cream. The prince blushed and tried to greet the princess, but she threw a pillow at him and screamed, asking what he was doing here because boys were not allowed to enter here. The girl was going to throw a bowl of fruit at the stranger, but he tried to stop her and explain himself. The angry princess threw a plate in the man's face and turned to the other girls, asking them to wake up because there was some suspicious person here, but then wondered why they didn't wake up. The guy got up and asked the princess to dry him, because he was the prince of the kingdom of Ludovsha, and his name was Alec. He came to save them all. The 3rd princess was surprised, and it was explained to her that they had been sleeping for more than 30 years because of the witch's curse. The prince had slain the dragon that protected the damage, and now, after he freed all the princesses, the curse would dissipate, and all the other inhabitants of the country would also wake up. The girl was very surprised and exclaimed, but the guy explained that she did not need to worry, and soon all the residents would come to their senses. The girl suddenly ran out of the room, which caused Alec to run after her and ask where she was going. Claire did not stop and silently ran down the stairs. The prince ran after her and thought that he had not slept for 3 days and his legs were falling off. The princess woke up and entered a room filled with sleeping people. She saw her father and mother, and at that time a breathless man said that they might need a little more time. But the princess could be sure. Claire interrupted the guy and said that it was wonderful. She didn't understand how it could be, because they were like in a fairy tale. Teachers and guards were sleeping in their clothes. The girl was running around the room and examining people. She said that this happened while she was sleeping, but suddenly she approached a stranger and apologized for being a little distracted, and it was terrible. Alec thought about how he thought she was having fun. He asked if all the girls in that room were princesses. Claire explained that there were 7 of them, so the prince thought about it and decided that in order to remove the curse, he would need to awaken all the princesses. The girl went towards the stairs and then offered to return to the others. While the boys were climbing the stairs, Claire turned to Alec and asked why he had woken her up first. The man was taken aback, and the princess continued to ask how he did it and how he removed the evil spell, because he must have possessed great magical power, so she did not understand what kind of magic he used. Alec screamed and stammered that no one could see his magic, and now he would take care of the rest of the princesses, so he asked Claire to wait here and slammed the doors. When the prince stood in the room, he thought about how he almost burned himself, and if she found out that he kissed her without permission, she would be shocked. The prince needed to wake up 6 more, and if he did it quickly, he might not be caught. Alec concentrated and realized that he could and would do it, after which he climbed onto the bed. Alec kissed all the princesses in turn, and when the last one opened her eyes, he was already very tired. All the girls started stretching and asking if it was morning already. Claire was sitting in the hallway at the time, looking out the window. She was thinking about how wonderful the weather was, but suddenly she heard a knock. One of the princesses hit Alec and called him a suspicious person, after which she asked what the guards were doing. The girl was Charlotte, the fifth princess, and her favorite food was strawberries. Claire burst into the room and stopped her sister. She explained that she had misunderstood everything, and this guy had come from far away to save them. Charlotte did not understand what the girl was talking about, and asked where she went in her pajamas. Claire did not notice this and replied that everything was fine and everyone was asleep outside. Charlotte raised her tone again and said that in any case it was impossible for a stranger to come in here. She pointed her finger at Alec and ordered him to leave, after which she asked if he was going to watch them change clothes. The prince went down the stairs to the street and thought that he had angered her. He lost his cheek and decided it wasn't scary, and he woke them all up and no one understood anything. It was a miracle, and his mission was accomplished. It was already dark outside the window, and the woman opened the door and called Alec, asking if he was still asleep. A girl in a dress came up to the guy and asked what had happened to his face and whether his brother had done it again, because in that case tomorrow he would need to talk to him again. Young Alec explained to his mother that it was because he was weak and his brother just took care of him. The woman exhaled and invited her son to go, because if he couldn't sleep, she wanted to read to him. When they came into the room, the prince said that it was a book for children, but the woman explained that she had not taken up them for a long time. Mom sat down on a chair with a book in her hands and asked her son if he knew the fairy tale about the sleeping princess. Alec got into bed and asked if the people of Amaryllis were still sleeping, and his mother replied that she had not heard about the forest of thorns disappearing. So, yes, it was a strange fairy tale. Now it was time to turn out the lights. Tears appeared in the young prince's eyes, and he said that it was sad, which surprised the woman. The prince jumped out of bed and shouted that he would save them, and began to ask if all people would wake up if they killed the dragon, because now he would not be able to. But one day, the woman hugged her son to her and said that he was a kind child, and she was sure that he would succeed, and now he had to go to bed to become strong. The queen wished her son good night. 10 years later, Alec was sitting by the grave. He turned around and heard a man's voice telling him that his majesty was calling him. The prince said that he was already on his way, after which he turned to the grave and apologized to his mother, and then went towards the castle. The king of the kingdom of Ludovcia was sitting on the throne and told his son that he was surprised and found out about his plans, so he asked if he was really going to go alone. Alec confirmed his father's words and explained that he had to test himself. The king was not sure that his son would be able to cope, and asked if everything would be all right. The third prince was also sitting in the room. He told that many brave men from different countries fell from thorns or became food for the dragon. The first prince laughed out loud and asked if it wasn't perfect, because it was better to send this bum there than to let him cool off after all, because he had straw instead of brains, and his sword was weak. My brother laughed at Alec and said that he had to prove that he was worth something. The younger prince agreed, and the king said that he would leave it to him, and he had 1 year. He had to go and conquer that country, and since everyone was in eternal sleep, he should have no problems. Alec asked them to rely on him, because he would definitely kill the dragon and remove the witch's curse, and then they would make Amaryllis part of their kingdom. The prince rode a horse and thought that he had decided to save their country and had to wake them from their sleep and warn them of the impending danger. The dragon was very scary, but the guy had to do it. He didn't have to relax. First, he had to show them that he was on their side. When the prince arrived at the castle towers, he saw a knight lying on the ground and thought that it was strange, and no one woke up. The guy looked at the guard's face and asked if he was alive, but realized that he was asleep, and he must have missed something. Alec was looking at the scroll, and suddenly someone put their hands on his shoulders and a female voice asked what he was thinking about. Chiara, the second princess, was sitting in front of the prince, and her favorite food was raisins. Alec was confused and wondered if she was sitting too close, and the girl asked him to wait, after which she took the stranger by the face and rubbed it. The prince blushed and looked at the girl questioningly. She laughed and said that it was just medicine for his wounds, and he had a scratch near his lips. Chiara asked him to tell her if he got hurt anywhere else, and the next time they were alone, she would look at them. Alec asked again, and his interlocutor turned around and said that they were there. There were 6 princesses on the stairs. They talked about how pleasant the weather was, looked around, apologized for the expectations, and were surprised that they had not been with them for a long time. Chiara explained to the guy that they hadn't waited that long, and now the girls sat down on the stairs. Claire said that she would now introduce the prince again. She explained to the sisters that it was Alec, the prince of the kingdom of Ludovcia. The man thought that he had to gain their trust, so he replied that it was nice to meet him. The princess said that her name was Claire, and, starting from the right, they were Flora, Mia, Eliza, Uchar, Charlotte, and Chiara. The princesses also replied that it was a pleasure to meet them, and Eliza raised her hand, called her sister a teacher, and said that she had a question, after which she asked when lunch would be. The prince was very surprised. He did not say anything, and Yuchar replied that now was not the time for this, but Eliza explained that she had not had breakfast yet and was hungry. Alex said that the cook was asleep too, so they were unlikely to have lunch. The princess screamed and was surprised, and her sister asked again, because everyone should have woken up. The prince thought so too, but it seems that something was missing here. He did what was said in the fairy tale, and the thorns had to disappear. Because of this they might need more time, but he would definitely come up with something if they could wait a little. Claire touched a friend on the shoulder and said that he had woken them from their sleep and done everything right, so she asked them to let them help him. The girl turned to the sisters and asked if everyone agreed. The princesses confirmed and replied that it would be faster this way, and it would just be boring to wait. The guy understood everything and thanked him for his help, and Claire asked where they would start. The prince did not think that he had not noticed some detail. He opened the parchment with the fairy tale, and explained that it was a manuscript that transmitted the traditions and tales of Amaryllis. Yuchar asked if she could take a look, but the prince took the scroll away from her and explained that he noticed that it was stained with blood, so he could not put it on him. The prince thought that it was dangerous, and it was written here about the kiss, and the princess replied that she didn't mind if it was dirty, but Alex still couldn't carry it with him, and had to get rid of it. Flora said that it was good to look for the riddle, but they had to get their lives back first. The sisters agreed and added that all the maids were asleep. There was cleaning and washing to do, and they would have a lot to do. They were already excited. Claire asked the guy if he wanted her to show him the lock from the inside. Alec agreed, and the guys suddenly turned to the noise. Eliza got down on the ground and said that she was already at the limit. She was holding a lot of food in her hands and said that she had found food and it looked like the kitchen was fine, and so far they would not have to worry about food. Eliza's favorite food was tomato. The princesses stood in the kitchen and looked around, wondering if it was still edible. After all, 30 years had passed. Alex sniffed the pot and decided that the smell was normal. But Elise noticed the omelette, grabbed it and immediately pulled it into her mouth. The girl fell silent, and the prince anxiously asked if she was okay. Eliza said that there was also cheese and mushrooms in it. Yuchar asked if it was still edible. The youngest princess was soiled with food, and Alec wondered if she was really a princess, after which he approached the girl and said that she had an omelette on her face. Eliza asked me to put it away and hurry up. The prince was embarrassed and obeyed, poking at her face, after which he informed her that it was now clear. Eliza licked the prince's finger and replied that it was delicious. Suddenly her sisters called her and asked her to come over for a second. Alec didn't understand what she was thinking. He looked in surprise at the girls who were looking for a frying pan on which they fried an omelette. One of the princesses climbed into the oven and said that it was still warm there, and there were even thorny thickets. The prince noticed how Yuchar's ass was sticking out of the stove, and she asked him to look at it too. The guy turned away and shouted that he hadn't seen anything, and the girl asked what he was talking about, and said that the food had also hibernated, like people, and it was very interesting. Yuchar's favorite food was fried fish and rice. Alec was thinking that she was interesting in herself, and the princess took a magnifying glass and began to examine the thorns, wondering how the ivy grew here and if he even needed water. She decided that she needed to take a sample and examine it in the room. The prince said that he should not have been touched, because there could still be a curse on him. It was the first time Yuchar had seen such a thing, and it was incredible. She did not know a lot of things, and there were many things outside the castle that she had to see. Alec asked the girl if she had left the castle. She explained that as soon as they were born, they were immediately predicted to be cursed, and therefore they were raised here, safe, and despite this, the curse still came for them. The prince understood everything, and Yuchar approached him and began to examine him through a magnifying glass, saying that he had a strange eye color. The princess examined the prince and said that it was the first time she had seen such an eye color, and he replied that she was too close. Charlotte asked the two of them to come here and wondered what they were doing at all. Yuchar called Alec, and they went outside, saying that in such lovely weather it was better to eat outside. The princesses thought it was a great idea, and Claire said that since they were outside, Alec needed to follow her. The princess took the man to the park outside the castle walls, which had a pond, many trees, sculptures, and a rotunda. The prince said that it was a beautiful garden, and Claire agreed and added that they were usually not allowed to enter here. Last time she caught a lot of bugs and took them with her. They couldn't come back here after that incident. Alec thought about how she was like a kid. He took out a blanket and asked if it would be okay here. The blonde princess replied that it would be perfect here. Flora apologized for forcing the guy to help, but he replied that it was nothing and he would always help. The girl said that the guy was reliable, and he thought that this princess was pretty calm, but suddenly someone screamed, asking to do it faster. Yuchar was untying the corset on Claire's back, and she was asking if it was ready. Alec opened his mouth in surprise, and the princess asked what was wrong with him, because she couldn't take off her dress. Eliza asked her sister to stop, because she was stretching the fabric and they couldn't undress themselves, so she asked the others to wait their turn, and she would change everyone's clothes. Claire took off her dress and touched the water, then jumped into the pond. Alec was very surprised, and the princess surfaced and smiled. She shouted that she really wanted to try to swim here. All the princesses took off their outfits and rushed into the lake, and Yuchar stopped at the prince and ordered him not to do anything stupid, after which she ran after her sisters. The girls were playing in the water and having fun, and the eldest of them said that they behaved like children and were full of energy. Yuchar took out a swimming mask with a snorkel, and the prince asked her what it was. The girl explained that it was a mysterious device that she found in the depths of the castle, and she believed that it was needed for diving, so she wanted to test it. The princess plunged into the water, and the guy decided that she was determined. Alec noticed that the smallest princess was sitting on the shore. It was Mia, the fourth princess, and her favorite food was salted nuts. The prince did not even notice her and asked the girl if she would swim. Mia clutched her teddy bear in her arms and replied that she hated getting wet and it was strange to swim in the river, which had God knows what. She would not do such dangerous things, because she was already an adult. The prince thought about it and reached out to the princess, because a butterfly landed on her head. Mia started screaming and twitching, asking the guy to take her off right now. Alec asked the girl to calm down and promised that he would remove her now, blew on the insect, and it flew away. The princess was shaking and sank to the ground, and the man explained that she had already flown away, which is why the girl rushed into his arms and said that she was so scared. Tears welled up in Mia's eyes. She looked at the prince and ran away. Alec turned around and noticed another princess, Flora. Her favorite food was cheese and yogurt. She was lying on a blanket and yawning, saying that she seemed to have dozed off. Alec asked the girl what she was doing, and she smiled and explained that she just decided to sleep because the sun was pleasant here. The prince said that she would catch a cold, and Flora replied that she was fine and asked why the guy didn't try it himself, because he was tired after a long fight. The guy sat down on the ground and said that the stones here were terribly hard, which is why the first princess put his head on her lap and said that it should have been better here. The prince did not understand what was happening and nervously thanked the girl for her care, but he had to lie on the ground. Suddenly, the wind blew the princess's outfit and practically exposed her breasts, which is why Flora apologized and explained that a strong wind blew out of nowhere. The princess stood up and announced that she would wear something more clothes. And at that moment Alec turned to stone and stared at the girl. The prince was lying on the ground and looking at the sky. He exhaled and thought that today was a very hectic day, got up and looked down into the lake, where the princesses were still playing. The man decided that it was very quiet here, but suddenly a female voice called him and informed him that she had found him. Claire was wet, water was running down her legs. She saw the prince and realized where he was. Alec was surprised and covered the girl with his jacket. He turned away and said that she was probably cold. The princess thanked the prince in surprise. They sat down together on the edge of the cliff, and the girl said that she still couldn't believe that they had been sleeping for 30 years and they needed to wake everyone up as soon as possible. But it was a little exciting. Claire felt like they were the only people in the world. The princess thought it sounded strange, but Alec replied that he understood her. Claire added that she wanted to discuss a lot with the guy, so she started asking questions. Why did he come here, and was the dragon scary? The prince replied that it didn't matter if he was scary or not, but at that moment he thought that he was terrified. Alec had long dreamed of saving the country of princesses and was very glad when they opened their eyes. He believed that he was born for this, so, by all means, he decided to lift the curse and protect the girls from invasion. Alec kept thinking that it was very scary, and at that moment the wind blew off Claire's jacket, and the girl slipped and began to fall off the cliff. The guy tried to save the princess and grabbed her hand, but they fell together, followed by a scroll with a fairy tale. The prince emerged from the water and asked Claire if she was okay, but immediately let go of her hands and remembered that she could swim. The girl was wet and thanked the prince, and he asked to return to dry land. But the princess asked him to wait and asked if they could stand like this for a little longer. The princesses swam around and asked each other if they knew where Claire was. Chiara decided that she had gone to the prince. The girls did not understand if she would be okay with this pervert, but the eldest princess replied that everything would be fine. Eliza surfaced from the water. There was a water lily on her head, and she told her sisters that she thought Alec was cool. But Yuchar replied that she would not have been able to understand such a thing, and he had a serious face, but there were clearly bad thoughts behind it, and it was impossible to trust him just like that. The princess with the mask on her face was surprised, because she was touched by a floating scroll. At this time, Alec was standing in the water with Claire and the guys were looking at each other, after which the princess closed her eyes and moved closer to the guy. But suddenly she was stopped by the voices of her sisters, who ordered her to move away from him. The girls stood with serious faces and looked at their sister, and she asked what happened to them. Flora held a fairy tale in her hands and asked the prince if it was true that he needed to kiss them to wake them from sleep. Alec didn't understand why she had the scroll and was very scared. He started shouting that he had no choice, and the princess asked if he had done it. The girls understood why the prince did not want to give them the scroll, and the youngest of them got angry and asked if he thought it was possible to kiss anyone you want. The prince himself understood that this should not have been done, and Flora said that she did not think that he was such a person, and Alec noticed that she seemed to be looking at garbage. At that moment, the youngest of the girls with a bear in her hands hit the guy in the face and called him garbage, and he shouted that he did not want to deceive the girls. Charlotte said that even if it was just a kiss, there was a death penalty for being too close to the princess, but since he killed the dragon, they decided to let him just go into exile, and now they ordered him to return to where he came from, and they would deal with the curse themselves. Charlotte looked at Claire and was surprised. At this time the girl was bursting into tears and was silent. She closed her mouth and ran away, and the other princesses looked at her in surprise, because in order for Claire to cry, she had to be terribly upset. The girls were worried about their sister and decided to catch up with her, so Alec was left alone. He was sitting on the ground and realized that he had hurt them. The prince was too weak in spirit and realized that he should have told them the truth from the very beginning. He was guilty that everything had turned out this way, and did not understand what he had to do, give up and go home. The prince decided that he could not leave this country. Moreover, he had to tell them that they would be attacked soon, but the princesses would not believe him. Then there was only one thing left, to make peace with them somehow. The prince made a decision and realized that without the trust of the princesses, he would not be able to lift the curse and save the inhabitants. Alec didn't know where to start, because he wasn't ready for this and realized what a mess he had made. It was much harder than killing a dragon. The prince got up and followed the fleeing princesses. Because of Claire, Alec couldn't sleep. The next morning, the prince stood in the garden and plunged his sword into a tree, trying to hit a bird. The guy decided that it was bad and at this rate he would starve to death before he reconciled with the girls. He broke his bow in a fight with a dragon and realized that he needed to hunt more often. Alec smelled it. He ran to the kitchen in the castle and saw a boiling pot. The prince decided that he would only eat one spoonful, but he could not, because then he would become an enemy. Suddenly, the guy heard a female voice saying that she was so hungry. He began to look around and decided that he needed to hide somewhere. The princesses had placed the food on the table and were about to start. At this time, Alec was sitting under the table right next to their feet, and the girls were talking about how it was just delicious and the dish was perfectly cooked. The prince knew that they were eating right here, and if they found him, then this time he would definitely be branded a pervert and then everything would be over. One of the princesses was holding tea in her hands and said that Claire really wasn't coming. She didn't have any dinner yesterday and she didn't sleep last night, so the sisters wondered if she was okay. Claire had never woken up before. When one of the girls crossed her legs under the table, the prince was scared and realized that they would understand everything if they touched him. Charlotte was angry. She said that she would not forgive the prince and felt so dirty when she thought about him. The first princess thought about it and replied to her sister that he had actually saved them, and they must have overreacted. Yesterday they were in shock, so they got angry. Alec thought about Flora, and Yuchar replied that if they hadn't noticed, he would never have told them, and they couldn't trust him. The girls shuffled their feet under the table, which caused the prince to dodge them, and the girls wondered what they had to do to wake everyone up. Flora decided that first she would have to look at the state archives and then they would. It was a good idea for the princesses, and Alec was dodging his legs with all his might and thinking about how they kept talking as if he wasn't here. The youngest princess would like to clean up the room, and Charlotte would like to do the laundry and change the bed linen. Chiara asked the sisters if they would like to take a bath first, and Flora replied that first they had to find the appliances they needed for cleaning. They had a lot of work to do. The girls finished and thanked each other for the meal, so the prince decided that they had already finished, and he was saved, but noticed the remaining pair of legs. He held on and decided that if he could hold on a little longer. Eliza was still eating and said that there was still food left. She was surprised because she dropped a tomato under the table and immediately reached for them. When the princess bent down, she found a scared guy there and screamed loudly. The girl called him a maniac, and Alec was lying on the ground and making excuses. The princesses were screaming that he had crept up on them. but the guy replied that he definitely wasn't trying to look at their feet. The girls screamed, ordering the guy to get out of here, and threw him outside the castle walls, after which they ordered him not to show his ugly face here anymore. Alec lay face down on the ground and thought that his consciousness was leaving him, and he could not make peace here. At that time, the princesses were walking along the corridor of the castle and carrying lunch into the room, asking if Claire was awake because they had brought her breakfast. The girl thanked the sisters without opening the door, and Eliza asked them to drink tea while it was still warm. The girls left the trays outside the room, and the door opened. Claire went out and asked Flora and Eliza what was the matter, but at that time an exhausted Alec fell in front of her feet and apologized for scaring the girl. But he was already on his last legs, and he had little strength. But he wanted to at least apologize properly, and even if he was destined to die, he shouldn't have. The prince did not finish and fell to the ground. After a while, Alec was greedily eating soup and snacking on his bread, and Claire looked at him in surprise and asked if he had eaten anything in the garden yesterday. The prince replied that at the time he thought the moment was inappropriate. He put an empty plate on the tray and apologized to the princess, explaining that he had come to apologize, but instead she saved his life, so the guy did not understand where to start him. Claire stopped the prince and said that he was the one who saved them, and she knew that there was only one way to wake them up, and he risked his life for them. The prince was surprised that she was not upset, and Claire lowered her head and said that she thanked him from the bottom of her heart, but she could not forgive him. The girl started crying again, and the prince ran to her and asked what had happened to her and if she had been drinking. At that time, the other sisters were walking through the garden, and the youngest of them asked what kind of tea it was. Flora explained that it was royal tea. It was a mixture of strong wine and black tea. It warmed the body and allowed you to sleep better. The girl made it for the first time and was wondering if her sister liked it. The princess thought about it and decided that it sounded interesting. Alec tasted the tea and said that it was a drink, so he wondered why she was here. At this time, Claire was crawling on the bed and took out books. She handed them to Alec. The prince began to read that it was said that it was a political marriage, but she was showered with love. The main character was a princess, but she couldn't resist in front of an aristocrat who was 3 ranks below her, and every night a handsome gardener came to her through the window. The princess threw a pillow at the guy, and he asked what kind of books they were. The girl explained that she secretly collected books that the servants threw away. They were her treasure. Alec noticed that Claire was hugging books and asked if they were all about romance. The besotted princess replied that she had gotten this one quite recently, after which she explained that there was such a touching scene where they started flirting inside the carriage, and this first kiss, which the first heroine had, was like this. The princess really wanted her to have just such a first kiss, but it happened while she was sleeping, and she didn't even remember it. Claire continued to cry and say that it was too much, but she decided that she had come up with something, threw the books and fell silent. The princess looked at the guy strangely and said that they needed to repeat it right away. She threw the prince on his back and moved closer for a kiss. Alec blushed, and Claire licked her lips and said what she understood, and it tasted like soup. The girl fell on her boyfriend's chest and immediately fell asleep and began to snore. The prince put Claire to bed and covered her with a blanket. Day turned into night. The prince did not understand anything. He told himself to breathe deeply, and he needed to calmly think about everything again. At first it was just that he kissed her, and then she kissed her, so these actions had to cancel each other out. The guy was sitting on the street and decided that then they would reconcile, after which he slapped himself on the cheek and grabbed his head. He didn't understand what it meant. Suddenly Alec was called by name. He opened his eyes and saw Claire in front of him, who was bending over him. The prince screamed in surprise, but then called the girl. She hid behind a pillar and began to bow, saying that she was very sorry. She was out of her mind this morning, and forcibly taking away a kiss was completely unforgivable. Alec couldn't listen to this, but the princess kept saying that therefore, as compensation, if the guy didn't mind, she asked to be allowed to reconcile him with everyone else. The prince got up, screamed, asking the girl if she was sure, and she confirmed and added that they would need his help to remove the curse, and she just couldn't do anything more for him, and how to establish relations with the others was up to the prince himself, just like the time when they were. Alec grabbed Claire by the shoulders and thanked her with a serious face, and the girl blushed. The prince apologized and explained that he did not want this, and Claire, with a lantern in her hands, turned around and replied that now they needed to slowly get everyone together. The girl took a stick and explained that there were still 6 princesses left, and she wanted to quickly draw everyone on Earth. The prince decided that she was good at it, because the girl got accurate drawings of the sisters. Claire said that it was great, and now it was necessary to decide who would be the first target. The prince thought that she liked it, but the girl was still not sure, but she thought that she should have been chosen first. Claire pointed a stick at the portrait of her sister with short hair. It was Chiara. Alec asked why it was Chiara, and Claire replied that she felt it would be better that way. And, to be honest, she thought she wasn't even angry and she had never seen her angry. Chiara might have thought it was a funny situation. The prince thought about Chiara and decided that he really thought so too, and Claire added that she was sometimes moody, but if she was offended, it would be easier to reconcile with her. Alec understood everything and thought that every morning she went to the herb garden behind the tower. The prince stood near the tree and decided that Claire had said so, but did not understand if everything would be all right. Chiara was sitting in the garden and picking herbs. The prince noticed her and hid behind a bush. He wondered how he should have called her, but the princess herself noticed him and asked the suspicious person if he needed something. The prince screamed and asked the surprised princess if he could help her with anything. Chiara thanked the guy and asked him to hold it, after which she handed him a basket full of herbs. Alec asked the girl if she would make herbal tea out of it, and she laughed and replied that he would understand everything if he followed her. The prince was surprised, but followed the girl, and she led him to a beautiful building with columns, next to which there was a fountain with mermaids. The guys went into the building, and the guy realized that it was a bathroom, and Chiara explained that she had always wanted to use this bath as a therapeutic bath, and it smelled good and improved your natural beauty, so the prince could just put herbs in this bag that she would take. Alec agreed, and the girl added that he was surprisingly sincere now, so she asked if he wanted to improve, trying to attract her in a good way. The prince started to deny it, but thought about being discovered. Suddenly, he heard a noise outside the door and assumed that someone was changing clothes there, and Chiara replied that she had told the sisters to come because she would be doing a therapeutic bath, and they somehow quickly got ready. The prince got scared and got up. He asked the girl if she wanted to say that they would all come here, because he was here. The imperturbable princess replied that the only door was there, and at that time it opened, and the rest of the princesses came out of it, wrapped in towels. The youngest of them screamed that she was the first, and all the others were still asleep. And Flora replied that she had been full of energy since the morning. Bathing so early in the morning seemed so indecent to the girls. The sisters agreed with each other. They hung a towel on the statue and got naked, then climbed into the water and said that it was good there, it was hot on Charlotte. The first princess said that it was not in vain that they came here, because they cleaned so hard yesterday. Naked girls noticed floating bags in the water and said that as soon as they thought it smelled nice, Chiara herbs turned out to be here. They understood what therapeutic baths meant and wondered where Chiara was. At this time, the princess herself hid behind one of the columns with the guy and was silent, and he thought that it couldn't have been worse, and even though Claire was now on his side, if they noticed him, they would order his head to be cut off. Chiara whispered to the frightened prince that this time he would be executed, and laughed, and he thought that she was also adding oil to the fire, but the girl beckoned the prince to follow her and led him to the door. The guys hid, and the princess said that it looked like they hadn't been seen. The prince looked around and asked what kind of place it was. The girl explained that it was a nice bath, and Alec noticed that she tried so hard to save him. The prince decided that it would definitely not work through the window. He drew attention to the fountain in the form of a lion, and Chiara at that time brought herbs to it, which is why the prince asked if she would add herbs here. The girl explained that this bath was for him, and these herbs helped well with cuts and wounds. She collected them for the guy, and his wounds after the fight with the dragon had not yet healed, so she asked him to consider that she was doing this as a sign of their friendship. The princess was sitting by the bathtub and ordered the guy to undress, and he asked what she said. Chiara reminded the prince that she had said that she would examine his wounds. Alec said that he could not allow the princess to do this, and she replied that then it meant that he did not accept her sign of friendship, and it was sad. The prince was scared and surprised, but replied that he agreed and would accept her kindness with open arms. Chiara was delighted, and the guy added that although his wounds were not so serious. The girl approached the guy and began to help him unbutton his jacket. She approached and was surprised. Alec was the third prince of Ludovisi. He was a stupidly serious and passionate man. His favorite color was the color of red brick, dark red. When the prince was naked, Chiara noticed that he was all beaten up, and his clothes were mostly intact, so he did not notice. The prince explained that it was because he had already changed his clothes, and during the glitch with the dragon, he noticed that there were only scraps left on him. The princess understood everything, and at that time steam rose from the water in the room. Chiara said that the guy was completely carefree. With such a careless attitude he would be covered in bruises. The girl pointed at the prince with her finger and said that he probably hadn't even washed his wounds, and it would be a disaster if the infection got into them. But for now he needed to get into the bath, and in the meantime she would prepare a compress for him. The prince thanked the girl. He began to look around and think that he was grateful to her, but did not understand how he could take off his clothes here and whether Chiara would mind. because it was a private room. The girl grinned and asked the guy if he was shy, but he replied that he wasn't at all, so the princess explained that she would turn away, so she asked him to hurry. The prince understood everything and agreed. He got into the water and tensed up and began to shake, thinking that it was hotter than he thought, and his wounds could open. The water in the pond was normal enough, but it was a symbol of his reconciliation with Chiara, but he couldn't get into the water. The princess leaned over and asked if she was too hot, and the guy thought that she turned back so quickly, and with blushing eyes replied that the water was perfect. The princess noticed that Alec had a scary expression on his face. She explained that it could sting, but this way the cuts would heal faster, after which she took the plant out of the water and explained that it was rosemary. It was often used in cooking, and it had a pleasant smell. And there was also aconite. It reduced pain and inflammation. The prince replied that the girl knew a lot about them. Chiara said that the gardener taught her, but she was bored, so she did it. The princess was going to use the cloth, but the prince asked if she was sure because she would get dirty. The girl replied that everything would be fine and asked to give her her hand. The prince agreed, and Chiara began to rub his hand and cuts, and Alec began to shake even more, which made the princess remember that it could pinch a little, and asked if he was okay and if the guy couldn't stand it, he could talk. The prince raised his head, laughed and asked the girl not to worry because he could handle it, but immediately screamed. Chiara apologized and tried to explain, but soon everything was ready. She bandaged the prince's arm well and he thanked her, after which the princess circled Alec's neck and asked if he had tried his best for them, so she thanked him. Suddenly, the guys heard voices and someone was calling Lottie outside the door. Naked princesses entered the room and wondered what kind of room it was. The girl remembered that there was a lion's mouth here and wondered how they could forget it. The sisters thought it smelled nice and it was rosemary, so they decided to go and see. One of them had a good nose, so Lottie asked her to stop, because it was impossible to run in the pool, and Eliza could slip. The prince realized that they were coming here. Chiara explained that it was Eliza and Lottie, but Alec decided that it was bad and the door was not closed. But the princess explained that she was not there at all. Alec clutched his head and thought that it was all over. He was already branded a pervert at breakfast yesterday, and now he's going to get even more accusations. Chiara decided that there was nothing she could do. She untied the towel and threw it on the floor, then took off the jewelry and, completely naked, went into the water. The prince looked at the girl in surprise.